NEWSLINE with Faraz Shaukatali.
And a very good evening to you. This is NEWSLINE Live, and we're broadcasting from the Newsfirst studios in Dorset Street in Colombo, as we almost always do. And this evening, to discuss a matter, one more matter that is close to most people's heart, traffic and congestion and public transportation and so on. We've got a sort of specialist on the subject. He's been on the program several years ago, but he's here again today, and we're very grateful for that. Professor Amal Kumarage, is right here with us. Very good evening to you, Professor.
Good evening to you, Faraz.
And welcome on the show, Amal, again after several years. Nice to see you. Bus lanes, are they going to work?
We've got to make them work.
Right.
That's one way in which we can make a sustainable solution,
Right.
a sustainable solution to what is called the traffic problem in Colombo,
Right.
as has been done in many cities around the world.
But the most recent one seems to have collapsed.
Well, I mean, what happened was the bus lane was hijacked with the motorcycles and three-wheelers put in there. It no longer operated as a bus lane.
Right.
And that was the problem, and the public were very much made aware that that would not work. But bus lanes, as they have been designed from 2017, have been working. Of course, that's only the beginning. The quality of the buses need to improve. The ticketing, the information, the driving, all of that needs to improve, and that is something that has still not followed, even though the physical bus lane is there. So the idea, and what has worked in other countries, is you make the travel by bus comparable to travel by a private mode, and people will shift from their private vehicles to public transport.
That's a long journey on its own itself, isn't it? Because the state, now if you look at most offices in Colombo, if you take Colombo, most offices, if not all, are air conditioned for comfort, not only for visitors to the offices, but also for the workers in the office. It's more productive apparently, and so on. But if they were to turn up, and so therefore they dress up in with that in mind. Now, if they were then to travel by public transport, let's say in a bus or in a train, unfortunately they'll turn up into office sweaty, smelly, and more tired than when they started out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this, your question highlights the perception we have of public transport in Sri Lanka, where AC is not the norm.
It isn't the norm.
It isn't the norm, and that is
the train from Colombo to Kandy is immensely successful. The first class bit. There's a private operator and there's a state operator, and I've travelled on both, and they do work.
Correct.
And the service is exceptionally good.
So it can be operated here. What I'm saying is that public transport by and large in Sri Lanka has been relegated as the poor man's transport, and in fact the way bus standards...
But that's the way it's been done, isn't it?
No,
Amal?
Why should it be done?
No,
like
but that's
that?
the way it is, because there has been no real move to make it any different.
Exactly, and that's what's needed, and that's what we are waiting to make best use of the bus lanes, so that the kind of service, the kind of buses, the seamless transport, the transfers, so that somebody can leave home and come to office on time, in the right frame of mind, physically, mentally, to put in a day's work. And go back ready to interact with family and friends. And that is the success of efficient transport. Now we are a long way from that.
So whose idea was this almost half-baked plan?
Yeah, so I think the police are also hard pressed, because they have to manage the ground situation. So they are trying various things, and unfortunately I think people come up with half-baked plans, and that was, I think, a very unfortunate experience. But at the same time, I think it has brought to the limelight that we need the right solutions. This was obviously the wrong one.
So I think there are several wrong solutions that put in, and I know positively that, for example, the flyover in Mount Lavinia, the Daeville Mount Lavinia flyover, that doesn't work. It's absolute rubbish.
No.
It's I don't know how many millions. I think they spent about $9 million or something for a tiny little piece of rubbish. And it doesn't work. There's another piece of what I call rubbish, and that is in Rajagiri. If at all, it should have been put the other way.
Yeah, so I've expressed my ideas about both of these long before they were built.
Right.
So there is this view that, infrastructure per se is what will sort traffic.
Yeah.
And expressways, flyovers and things are still considered the solutions to traffic congestion.
Right.
They don't. They only transfer a problem from one location to another location.
So the heart of the problem is that we need to uplift the standards of our public transport.
Absolutely, because Sri Lanka is a relatively high population density country.
Right.
And as the population density increases, the space you have for mobility gets shrunk. And therefore, you have to find the appropriate mode of transport for people. So you take many cities in the US, they have very low population density. Go to Canada, it's even less. Go to New Zealand, even less. And there, everybody can travel by car because the roads can be widened at will, and you have the economic strength to do that.
Yeah.
So the car becomes almost the ideal mode of transport in a city like that. But then you go to a Japanese city, or in Singapore or Hong Kong, where the population density is even higher than ours, and there's no way that they can have everybody coming by car, even though they have the same standard of living, income. So there they have 60, 70, 80%. If you go to Singapore, it's like 80% are on public transport.
What's the level of spend like if you take highways, roads, and so on? How much are we spending on that?
We in Sri Lanka?
Yes.
I'm embarrassed to say that, because we spend 200 billion rupees, or has been spending for the last few years, on building highways.
Right.
Okay. And then, of course, we pump in about 300 billion rupees of fuel.
Right.
We import about 250 billion rupees worth of vehicles and spare parts. And by comparison, we often complain about the 5 billion loss that the railway makes, or the 3 billion loss that the CTB makes. Private buses are not subsidized at all.
So the loss that the state transport services, the trains and the buses, it amounts to about $8 billion rupees a year.
Yeah, and the revenue they earn, the state buses would be, I think, and the railway, I would say it's about 50 billion rupees. So you're talking about 10%, 15% subsidy.
And how much is being spent to uplift those facilities?
Well, for buses, it's almost nothing.
Right.
Not in the billions.
Right.
For railway, yes, we do have some railway projects, so it's just started. But again, we need to make them the most urgently needed projects, not elevated railways and so on.
Yeah.
But things.
See, I noticed with some satisfaction that one of the newspapers is carrying a story that the presidential secretary has asked the LRT system to be scrapped and for the office to be closed.
Yes, so LRT is something, or rapid transit in generic form, is something Colombo needs.
Right.
And I would say maybe in the next 10 years, 15 years, depending on how fast we grow economically.
So, but they've closed it down because they don't want...
It's very expensive.
Yeah.
The 15-kilometer line is going to cost us about 400 billion rupees. And with about 1/4 of that, we can upgrade the entire bus system in this country from north to south, east to west.
When you say uplift the system, what do you mean? Throw away the old buses, bring in the new? Where are the low low-level buses so that wheelchair people have access.
Yes, so I mean, this is what should come in. Of course, you shouldn't, throw all the buses out on one day. Buses do age and retire over a period of 8 years. So you
But they'll only find themselves being repurposed, and the private operators will do it, and it'll end up in some other place.
buses are regulated, so you can bring in standards. For example, if you look at the buses operating on the expressways, they are fairly new. They are air conditioned. They have suspensions. So if you bring in the regulations, nobody can operate a bus on a route unless it subscribes to the regulations.
Right.
So a lot of our bus management has been, as I said, here is a mode of transport for the poor. We need to position public transport for everybody, particularly for the people who would otherwise use a car, take up limited space. And as you said, have end-to-end good service connectivity so that you can go in air-conditioned comfort, you can purchase your ticket on your phone, you get information on your phone, and that's happening all over the world. Just needs to be implemented.
Shouldn't all of this, the whole thing, the entire gamut of everything, shouldn't it all work together and be fused together? And in that I say, when they're looking at housing, shouldn't they be encouraging more housing, like maybe 100,000 apartments in Colombo only, so that you will then have less traffic on the roads, better city buses? I mean, in England you don't get the long distance coaches dropping passengers off willy-nilly on Park Lane or wherever it is, right? They go to the Victoria terminus and they drop them off there, and if you then want to take a bus, there's plenty of other local buses or the city buses.
Yes. So definitely that's we need to evolve a plan for Colombo. Colombo doesn't function like London, but we should have our own plan, and many plans have been devised over the years. But in terms of developing the bus system, I mean, it is regulated, so it is in the hands of the government to improve it as we require, to set the standards, to set the fares. It's just that we haven't had the correct leadership, the political will and the leadership to say this is something that's important for the now and the here of the country. Now that's what Lee Kuan Yew did in Singapore in the 1970s. That's what Ken Livingstone did in London in the 1990s. And Enrique Peñalosa started that whole movement in Latin America also in the 1990s. So those countries and cities have actually experienced a paradigm shift of how people look at public transport and support it. And they've been able to manage congestion in those cities very well.
Thank you for your questions. By SMS 0772 300 305. Remembering the service we had from buses when we were kids and before nationalizing, and then running to the ground a great service, the answer might lie there. Hand it back to private enterprise and they will give the best service with the best price to get and keep their customers. It's a sure thing. The government is simply incapable. They agree? They disagreed?
Agree and disagree partially, because
which bit do you disagree with?
In the sense that before independence, we had the second best public transport system in Asia.
You see, Sri Lanka is always living on reflected glory.
Exactly, and we are so why did we lose it? Why did we lose it? So we lost it mostly because we started treating or aligning buses, as I kept saying, for the poor people, and then people who escape poverty, get into the middle income, are provided vehicles, and then that becomes the preferred mode of transport. So for these 7 decades, public transport has been treated like that, and that is why it's still relegated to a third-class service with low fares, and we've still not been able to spark a change to say, no, this is a service for everybody.
It appears that nationalization has sort of missed the bus,
Yes,
so to speak.
Exactly.
Let's come back, Professor Kumarage, after this short break. We're going for a short break. Don't go away. This is Newsline Live. We'll be back very shortly.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. We're in conversation with a transport specialist, Professor Amal Kumarage from the University of Moratuwa, senior lecturer there actually. Now then, Professor, we asked you a question from a member of the public, remembering the bus service from when we were kids, and it was nationalized and then it went pot. And I asked you whether you agree and you disagree. You said both, but I'd like to know which bit of the question did you disagree with?
Yeah, that is saying that only the private sector can bring about change.
Yeah.
If you look at global examples, there are very good state operators who have turned things around.
Yeah, but if you look at the results in Sri Lanka, the government has hardly ever. I'll be hard pushed to think of which sector the government have done a remarkable
Exactly.
job. And therefore, before we look outside, we need to look inside. And we need, it's a bit like Mr. Wickremesinghe, you know, the United National Party's leader. He still doesn't realize that he wasn't wanted, right? And he won't go. So it's a bit like that. Governments must realize that they simply can't run businesses, and there are perfectly capable individuals and companies and conglomerates and so on and so forth who can, and they have they're doing their work properly. Yes. Why is that too difficult for them to understand?
Yes, I mean there are well-run transport operators, state-owned, all over the world.
Yeah.
There are similarly private operators. So just being private or state is not the answer here.
Yeah.
But as you say, in our part of the world, and particularly in Sri Lanka, the state is not a very efficient operator of anything. And therefore, we need to always think of either allowing state organizations full commercial independence to operate as professional transport providers. And that's not, now that is actually what they do in India or in Singapore. They are provided the freedom to operate and even make profit if that is possible. So it is still possible here, but our political culture has not enabled that for decades. Now, going beyond that,
there is another victim of the politicization of the processes.
Exactly. So I would say ever since nationalization, transport has been a victim of politicization with every change of government. So coming back to answering this question, the first and fundamental responsibility of government in providing for mobility for people is to ensure that there are good quality suppliers. They may be state, they may not be state operators. It doesn't always have to be state. Now, over the last several decades, government has considered itself as an indispensable operator. That is not the fundamental role of government. The fundamental role of government is to ensure that there is adequate suppliers and you regulate that properly. And that is what should be done. How do you regulate the bus sector? How do you regulate the taxi sector? How do you regulate the railways? Must Sri Lanka Railway only be state operated? There are many models of railways in the world where the freight may be operated by private sector, the passenger may be operated by public sector, the track is owned and operated by somebody else, and they pay for the service they render to each other, and they are made into more commercially viable entities.
I've just come along Marine Drive. I saw a train going south. It was not overfull, but it was full, and I could see that there was no social distancing. That's another problem. they could, but then as it was pointed out to me, what do these people do? Do they just wait for the next train? But the next train might be several, maybe more than half an hour later, because they don't have enough trains. How do we solve this problem?
Yeah, so here we have a problem of capacity. As I said, you know, we need to have enough rolling stock, we need to have enough track capacity, so there is a dearth in capacity as well.
So should we stop spending money on building highways to nowhere? And
my solution is simple. Now we spend 200 billion, as I said. If you save 25% of that, which is 50 billion, in 2 years we can turn around this entire public transport sector.
Right.
So we have the money. We are spending it on probably not the most opportune things that this country needs now.
We can actually fund that 50 by cutting out the corruption.
Yes,
even
that too.
Even about 50% of the corruption.
Possible, yes.
You think we can work on that?
Well, maybe you can.
Right. But isn't that something that the public need to be aware of these things?
I mean, I would add another word, and that is wastage. Corruption and waste go hand in hand.
Indeed.
And I'm not sure which is more. Sometimes I think negligence, irresponsibility, and the waste that flows from that, from poor planning, poor design, poor procurement, they don't necessarily go into anybody's pocket.
So, on that note, the fact that the University of Moratuwa has been for almost from time immemorial the preferred advisory capacity person or institute to the government of Sri Lanka, clearly in terms of transport they haven't taken much note of what you all have said.
Yes, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, they say. So our role is advisory. We are not responsible for implementing.
Right.
So that's where you know, the buck stops, unfortunately. Sometimes I have myself been an implementer, has been serving on the National Transport Commission and various places on boards for several years. But again, there are times you can do things, then time that you can't do things.
Right.
You know, so transport has not got a window of opportunity long enough with a government, with a minister who is enlightened about, you know, the solution to transport, and who has brought together professional thinking and say, you know, let's get on with it.
But we have a president now who has a reputation for not wanting failure, and who is supposed to be pretty, you know, stick and all that business. So how do you think he's going to react to this realization that this latest traffic scheme was a bit muddle-headed to start with, and has therefore been abandoned?
Yes, so I mean, this is again an opportunity, you know. Sometimes Sri Lanka learns more from failures than from advisors.
Right.
We learn the hard way.
Okay.
So these are opportunities that I myself am using to highlight the need for proper planned design interventions rather than ad hoc.
Right.
Which is our preferred option in most things. You just go do something, and then you start blaming each other and then wondering what went wrong. You know, and countries don't necessarily develop with that kind of approach. Countries that plan their investments and align them and coordinate them and do them at the right point, at the right cost, these are the ones that actually succeed and grow. So we need to move not only in transport but in many areas away from that sort of very ad hocracy to more planned way of doing things. So transport needs, it's complex. Many ministers are involved. It's regulated at 3 levels of government. We need strong policy, we need strong leadership, we need strong institutional, we need professionally qualified people heading those places, and there are gaping holes in this entire system which we've been trying to fill.
Gaping holes indeed. Professor Amal Kumarage, thank you very much for being on Newsline Live. And we hope that the transport system, we can live in hope. After all, there's no life without hope. Thank you. And that's the way it was on Newsline Live. Take care. Have a great evening ahead of you. And of course, God bless.